Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Gurus, where every Friday we explore stories of international business and speak with industry leaders operating around the world. I'm your host, Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Thank you for joining us. If you're tuning in for the first time, we start each podcast with a running segment called Faux Pas Fridays, where we explore a funny blooper or mistranslation that does not quite convey the professional image that your organization wants to project. So in this case, there was a sign at an Indian airport from the Airports Authority of India. I'm sure they meant to say, because the Indians speak good English, eating on the carpet is strictly prohibited. And instead, the sign very clearly said, eating carpet is strictly prohibited. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's guest, who is Bill Kenney. And Bill is the founder of Meet, a company that helps international B2B companies gain traction and scale in the US inbound through trade shows, events, and strategic connections. Bill also leads Softland Partners, a global network of support organizations and service providers that helps companies from any country, industry, or stage expand internationally. Welcome, Bill. Delighted you're with us.
Thanks for having me, Philip. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Good. Before we dive in, I know that you're a wonderful sailor and you live on a houseboat. So perhaps you could tell us a bit of your background and the continents you visited and how you grew up and how you gained your global interest and experience.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll make it clear. We don't live, for those that know about boats, we don't live on a houseboat. We're on a catamaran, sailboat. So a houseboat there is a definite type of boat called a houseboat, which is kind of more for lakes and inland travel. We're definitely open, blue water type adventurers. So, but you asked a question about my background and what got me interested in the water, and international. So my family traveled a fair amount when I was a kid. Actually, before I graduated from high school, my dad had a huge affinity for mountain climbing. So we actually climbed the Matterhorn in Switzerland. We did a lot of skiing kind of in Europe and just traveled around a bit. And then also when I was pretty young, I got selected to the U.S. sailing team and competed on the U.S. sailing team for about 10 years and got to compete in pretty much every continent except for Antarctica. I'm not sure what the sailing's like there, but we didn't make it there. So that, I mean, and one of the cool things about that, and particularly, I started sailing internationally when I was probably 16 or 17, and at that time and at that age, whenever you were competing in a, whether it was another country or another state, quite often there would be a local host that would allow you to stay at their home. So you weren't staying at a local Holiday Inn or whatever. You were pretty much immersed in the culture, whether it was Japan or Denmark or Australia or wherever, you were staying with the local. So, and we were there for weeks, if not in some cases months. And so you really got a sense of their world. And then in our business Meet, we've been doing servicing exclusively international companies coming into the US for 10 years. So that's also been very immersive in terms of, sort of converting the maybe the fun and experiences into much more practical business experiences, but dealing with some of the challenges and successes that companies have as they looked across not just oceans but cultures to market.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I'm sure you've got some very interesting stories of international companies coming into the US. And international business works both ways, of course. It's both American companies going abroad and foreign companies coming here. And the same challenges and the same issues apply, just often in reverse. So perhaps you could share with us some interesting stories of either in different kinds of marketing or expectations or communications that you've encountered and how you resolve those.
Yeah, I would say probably the common denominator pretty much that every company that we see coming into the U.S. Has, and I'm putting this into a sort of a sales and marketing communication context, is that when the marketing materials that they share with us that they're used to using at home or in the markets that they're currently in, often communicate features of their product instead of benefits. And certainly when they come to the US market, we're much more succinct in terms of wanting to know what's in it for me, that famous radio station, WIIFM. And so we, a lot of our work early on, besides figuring out the right events for them to go to, is really Americanizing their marketing communication. So we think of it sort of in 3 steps. The first is really about helping them identify what fish they want to catch, thinking that that fish is a metaphor for a prospect, and of course I have to use maritime references. So what fish they want to catch, and then of course that informs the next 2 things they need to know, which are, where are the fish? Where am I going to go fishing? And then finally, what bait am I going to put in the water? So when we kind of come up with an agreed on hypothesis about who we're trying to catch, where they are, and what bait will catch them, then we really design whatever marketing communication, whether it's a sell sheet or their expo booth or any of the information on their website, so that it is communicating directly to. We try to think of it as what's keeping that fish, that target buyer persona, what's keeping that person awake at night, and so that our communication is really about, number 1, getting their attention, and then 2, alleviating or sharing information that allows them to see that both we understand their challenge, but also that we have some benefits that will help alleviate that challenge.
Are there different kinds of companies that you've encountered, whether from different countries or different regions, that have very different perceptions of I guess what marketing is, or what US marketing is, or what they need to offer? You say that they focus on features instead of benefits. So are there any again examples of countries that are that do things radically differently from us?
Yeah, it's interesting. We get asked that question a lot, and I guess I would say I can't say that, and we've worked with European, Asian, and Australian companies, so we've seen a pretty good diversity of companies. And thinking about Europe and Asia, certainly even just within those continents, there's incredible diversity in the types of companies. But I guess I wouldn't say that there is there's something that's radically different in one region. I would say that that sort of understanding of making sure that you're communicating benefits. I think then it becomes really what's their sales aptitude. I think after that, I think marketing and sales obviously are intended to work very closely together, and marketing ideally presents highly qualified leads to sales, and then sales does whatever needs assessment needs to be done, and then to the extent there's a match, then they work on converting that prospect into a sale. And I would say the other kind of major challenge that we see in terms of companies coming into the U.S. is their sales aptitude, and not that they're bad salespeople. It's just when our expectations of the U.S. are very strong around follow-up, and the way we communicate in terms of just understanding needs before it's almost like when you go to a doctor's office. It would be a rare day to walk into a doctor's office, and when you walk in, before the doctor does anything, they prescribe, they give you a prescription, right? Or they operate on you. They don't do that. They do some kind of an assessment before they would advise any solution. And there may not be a problem, so they have to make sure that ethically that they do that. And I think in the U.S. our practice is very similar to that in terms of, especially in B2B sales, how we look at making sure that, number one, we have empathy and we understand what the customer needs, and then we apply, if we have the right solution, we apply that solution for them, or we give them advice as to where to find the solution. But yeah, I think that I think another major gap that we see is that it's kind of the full.
Are you saying that a lot of foreign companies don't do that, don't have that process, or don't understand that process?
Yeah, no, I actually look at it a lot like when I speak English and only English, and not even that well mostly. So when I go to a foreign country and I'm at a restaurant and I order a meal, I'm interacting with whoever the waiter or waitress is, and I do my best to articulate what I like. And when they don't understand me, my only recourse as an absolutely ignorant American is to speak louder.
Speak louder.
And unfortunately, that's the way I see a lot of marketing today in terms of the foreign companies that come in. And unfortunately, it's also in the US, it's in politics and some of how we market as well. And my suggestion isn't to talk louder, it's to learn the language of the person you're interacting with, right? And I think that's and I would imagine you would advocate that as well, is we want to speak the other person's language, not ours, louder. It's probably the better way to do it. So, so when we, as we work with clients, that's really, and again, I use the word empathy. It's really about understanding the needs and values of the people we're working with or across from us, and being able to the extent we can, help them satisfy those needs. And I think that's a big challenge we see of international companies coming in, is they, because they don't understand these customs, we'll use bigger fonts, or we'll talk louder, and we'll try to compel them that way.
I would think that there's some major cultural issues. For example, one of the issues in Asia specifically, they're very much group oriented. It's the emphasis is always on the group and hopefully the harmony of the group and so forth, and not the individual. And so one doesn't normally criticize the senior leader, because that person would let them lose face. So you have to be very careful how you phrase things and so forth. And dealing with young, brash Americans who are very direct and don't care about whom they criticize, really, becomes a very different way of acting. So have you seen these kinds of issues, these kinds of cultural issues coming into the US, and how people behave or think they should behave and then get bowled over, perhaps?
It's funny that you mentioned that. We actually have a Taiwanese client that we actually just had a meeting with their three founders 2 days ago, and the whole purpose of it was sort of a meeting where we had to sort of level set what we're seeing. Unfortunately, we were seeing and are seeing a couple of things in the company that, for us, just having done this for a while, are indicators that, whether it's in 6 months or 12 months, they might not be around. And the fail points that we see, and I think you hit one of them really well, which is, and this kind of brings that groupthink concept, is that we have meetings with their marketing team, we have meetings with their sales team, and we'll have meetings and then and we'll make decisions in the meeting. They'll go away, and because we've made decisions, we start, 10,000 kilometers away, we start taking action based on those commitments or those decisions. They come back a week later at the next meeting and tell us the decisions were changed, and they go somewhere else. And these are, some of them are simple decisions, some are complex. And the thing that is interesting, and this is what we really had to come straight at them with, and truly we see this as, we've seen this in enough clients now, and we've seen it in European clients as well. But it is, for us, it is one of only a couple of indicators that the company is going to fail. Every company we've seen it in, because we haven't had this sort of come to Jesus type meeting, which we did with this company the other day, we feel we now have seen it enough to be confident in the problem, I would say. And but what we're finding is that when this happens, is that the people who ultimately influence decision, and often this one or two of these sort of founders, they're not in the marketing or the sales meeting, but and so they have no benefit of the context of why the decision was made or what strategy we're aligning with. And so not only do we have to waste a lot of time to go back around and give them the context and kind of reverse the whole situation and all that, but they just, because they're not in a day-to-day basis in these conversations, but they feel compelled to control. It's a really interesting thing. So I would even say, the group thing can be a challenge, but also the lack of empowerment to the people that they've tasked with various roles. Where in the U.S., we give away responsibility, I think, pretty freely. I mean, we give it away until somebody sort of can't handle it, and then we start reeling it back. And I think, at least what we've experienced in some of these other countries, is they're much more reticent to delegate, and to delegate, sort of fully and confidently. But it's brutal when we see that. That is just it's a massive fail point, because it's incredibly frustrating. It's a waste of time, and they end up again making decisions without the benefit of any context. And so it's it just doesn't work.
This top-down management approach is traditionally very European as well. Do you see it on all continents?
So we've had a fair amount of Hungarian companies that we've worked with. There, it's at least in some of the companies, it's been a challenge. Not all of them, but some. Less, I would say, in the UK. That doesn't tend to be. I think they're closer to our style of management. Although they have some words they spell funny, but other than that, I'd say they're closer.
By the way, it's their language. We're just borrowing it.
That's true. Churchill had some of the better words on that for sure. It's certainly. In this situation, it's kind of impossible to generalize well, because it's certainly not everywhere, but and there are undoubtedly U.S. companies that have similar challenges. But crossing borders, and particularly where you're, one of our Australian clients called it the tyranny of distance. But the idea that, I think when we're all at the same water cooler every day, there's a certain amount of interaction and communication that just happens naturally. When we're separated by oceans and tens of thousands or thousands of kilometers, it just and time zones are absolutely a communication killer. I think that all acts against us. And what we often in our onboarding with clients talk about is, it's our practice to over communicate. We ask that you do the same, and we give them some sense of where the fail points will be. And it, just that whether it's misunderstandings or, miscommunication, the more and better we communicate, the less of that we'll see.
Yeah. I've often observed at trade shows, especially from with East Asian companies such as the Koreans and some Japanese, but a lot of the Koreans, certainly the Chinese, they have wonderful typos in their English signs. And they spell words wrong, words are missing, they express something totally incorrectly. And I often point this out to the American salespeople. Say, I'm sure you're aware of this. Is there a problem here? And they said yes, because if we try to bring it to the senior managers, who are the Asian owners of the company, that they take it as personal criticism. They lose face, or we can't raise the issue with them because they think that they've done it correctly. And usually these translations are done by some in-house person, say in Korea, who thinks that he or she knows English well, and does it. And you can't criticize that person because again, then it reflects badly on the owner or the president.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'd have a client like that very long. That wouldn't work well. No, I mean, ultimately, we feel an incredible responsibility for their success. So if we don't feel we can have that kind of influence, we'll make a recommendation to them around some other resource that might be able to help them. But we won't be the right resource. Ethically, we can't do that. We wouldn't show up at a show with anything less than something we think would succeed.
Absolutely. Can you give us some examples of perhaps ventures that really have not gone well? Either ones that you know of, or ones that have been your clients, or perhaps ones that you know about?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a client a couple of years ago that was actually a little bit out of our space, but still one that we had. I would say, and I'll back up. Our focus and most of our clients have been in life sciences, energy, technology in general, and then some defense as well. And this company was in the nutrition space. We have a sort of a decent amount of knowledge in that space and a good contact. So we worked with them for quite a while. And the challenges didn't have anything to do with our effort or the product or anything like that. But the challenge for them was a variety of things. They had it was a whole series of things, but they had challenges getting EPA certifications to bring the product into the U.S. They actually had challenges with the EPA's equivalent in Australia called the TGA. They changed a lot of the legislation while we were working with them. And then they had delivery and distribution challenges as well that were really hard. And when obviously our conversation here is a lot about language and communication and so on. And one of the things that we saw, I think there are a variety of things that were different about the way they were communicating about their product in Australia than we would advise, and we did advise for their communication in the U.S. So number one is they had actually a really popular podcast. They were getting, what were they getting? About a 250,000 listeners a month to their podcast. Significant. But the episodes were like an hour and a half long. I mean, they were really, really long. And for the U.S. audience, that's a pretty big investment. Joe Rogan gets away with it for sure, but the rest of us mere mortals, and I think it's okay to do that length. Joe Rogan learned a while ago, though. He breaks up, 1 minute to 5 minute vignettes that get people to the hour or to the hour and a half or 6 hours, depending on who he's talking to, or if he's smoking pot with Elon Musk or something like that. And some of the other challenges around their communication. So they had the kind of the long podcast without the vignettes. They, from a marketing standpoint, and another certain challenge to communication is their brand had all sorts of. So if they, let's just say they had 20 different products, and with different flavors and whatnot within each product. So, a whole multitude of, ultimately, if you lined up everything, there's probably more like 50 different options for different products you buy from them. And the labeling was inconsistent. So, the colors and and where the logo was and how the information was displayed, if you looked at anyone individually, they were fine. They were well represented. They had good English, and they were actually kind of pithy and fun in terms of how they communicated their value proposition. But if you walk through the store, it would be difficult to say this product is from the same family as that product, because there was so many different ways with the different types of products that they represented, that the labeling and the coloring and all that. One of the products, would be white with white labeling, and another one would be in a black container with, a black label, and it was just hard to create any sort of brand connection between that. And they had, in Australia, they were very strong and they did really, really good business. But coming into the US, obviously it's a much larger market, and there's a lot more noise on our shelf because there's just, that space is really filled. And so I think to compete here, you've got to be much more buttoned up, and you've got to be, much easier to find. You want to take sort of the friction out of it for the customer. And, I think from a communication standpoint, that was really challenging. And some of the same challenges came through, like when you went to their website and stuff like that, in terms of finding the product and so on. So, yeah, I think, I think the real obligation that we have in terms of helping develop communication is really around how do we make it easy for the customer to know, number one, what we do. And I walk through trade shows, sort of a couple a week. So I get really good sense. And the thing is, I walk through, and you could walk through a trade show. We go in some cases to some very large enterprise trade shows, and you'll see whether it's the IBMs or the GEs or whoever, these large companies, and it these events, usually it's one division that's exhibiting, but the division has the corporate tagline as opposed to their value proposition or whatnot as their headline. And so it's amazing to me, not just for international companies coming in, but companies in general, how much they don't understand or look at the way they communicate from the customer's point of view. They look at it in terms of, how do we, the marketing person is saying, well, gosh, this is our brand, this is what we do, but they're not really looking at it. The customer's walking through here. This is an aircraft or aerospace show. They're interested in, jet engines, let's say. Why do we have the overall corporate slogan on instead of the value proposition of the jet engine group, which is a totally different communication. Again, when you think about what you're trying to do in a booth, it's I had lobster traps as a kid, so I think of a trade show booth a lot like a lobster trap. A lobster trap, you put some bait in a second chamber, and the lobster, to get to that, comes into sort of a first chamber. It's hard to get out, but easier to get into the second chamber, and the second chamber essentially traps them, and so they get in and they get to the bait, but unfortunately they the next morning the lobster man or woman comes out and takes them to market, basically. And so when I look at, so when we look at a booth, we see the objective of a booth. It's not to trap people, certainly, but it's to put a piece of bait out that it's similar to those that are someone on listening will know the term inbound marketing, but very similar to techniques that are used in inbound marketing is that if you understand who you're trying to attract, you put a bait that only they're interested in. So if we decide, I use the metaphor of fishing. If we decide we're trying to catch, salmon as an example, or tuna or striped bass, we put a bait in that only they're going to respond to, and all the other fish swim by. And when we do that, there are a couple of values that come from that. One is that not only are these people much more qualified, because instead of us being out in the sort of in the aisle pulling them in, they're opting in. They're saying, no, I recognize this is a problem or an opportunity, and I'm coming in because I'm self-selecting to respond to this. And so that when we're trying to help a client find a prospect, we look at a prospect as having to satisfy three things. They have to have a need, they need to have money, and also they need to be urgent. And this test is a way to find the people who are urgent, which obviously all of us want prospects that have some movement in our funnel. We don't want prospects that sort of grow hair. We want them to have some momentum, and this is a way to really better assure that we have high quality prospects by using communication in a way that again only our prospect or the client's prospect will respond to. And ideally, if we're at a trade show with 10,000 people, maybe there are 50 or 100 prospects in the room. So this is really a very delicate, it's like doing surgery. It's a really delicate process to develop that communication that, is going to be specific to that type of a buyer. And we'd be very happy if 9,950, continue on their way, and the right 50 opt in. But we can A/B test that. We can kind of, over time, optimize whatever messaging for each buyer persona.
Absolutely. Well, that's fascinating. Well, thank you so much. This has been certainly very, very intriguing from, again, the inbound point of view, which is just as valid as the outbound point of view, and what people need to understand in terms of international marketing. Is there anything else briefly that you'd like to share before we close?
Oh, I think that's those are kind of the highlights, I'd say, and it's I think for all of us, it's a continuous process, and it all works better when we listen. That's for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. It's been a wonderful pleasure gaining your insights today and hearing your great stories. This has been Philip Auerbach. Please join us again next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business.